Good afternoon, everyone. I, Sadra Shanaz, Assistant Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Integral University, Lucknow, would like to welcome you all in this session of our value-added course entitled Ancient History from the Purview of Civil Services Examination. I hope you all are taking advantage of this course. Now, I would like to introduce today's expert, Dr. Khwaja Danish Hamid, Assistant Professor at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Integral University, Lucknow. He done his PhD entitled Pakhtun Movement in Pakistan: Origins, Development and Transformation, 1957 to 1986 from Jamia Millia Islamia. He has presented and published many papers in national and international seminars and conferences. The topic he has taken to speak is political structure of Vedic age. The polity of early Vedic period was basically a tribal polity with the tribal chief in the center, which was transformed towards monarchy in the later Vedic period. Welcome, Dr. Khwaja Danish Hamid. Now you can proceed with your lecture.
For introducing me. Thank you very much, ma'am. So I will be starting with my talk by saying good afternoon to everyone, and especially to the viewers who have patiently bore up and make their presence felt over here. So today's topic of the lecture is political structure of Vedic age. So before going into any further details, let me tell you what kind of questions that I will be catering in during my presentation. It will be what is politics and how what is politics, what is politics all about, what is Vedic, what is Vedic religion, what is political culture structure, and what is political structure of Vedic age. Finally, the topic. Then I will start by explaining you what is the tactical use of history. That means how history is interrelated with nationalism. So, if we were to glance at Romila Thapa's work, uh, she believes that, as we have seen, those who were mostly directly concerned with India in the 19th century, that they were British administrators, many of whom were on the history of many of whom were writing history of India. Such histories have tended to be administrators' history, recounting the rise and fall of dynasties and empires. This was also the predominant subject of historical study in Europe at that time. Admiration of the Roman Empire is imprinted both on those involved in the British Empire and on the and on the side of historian. So another example of Weizmann burden theory, that British were white people, so they were placing themselves on the top of the civilization. So such a historians such as Vincent Smith, writing Indian history at the turn of the century, the first empire provided the model of the second, means sort of that the Roman Empire was ideal for them, and through the lenses of Roman Empire, they were viewing the history of the world, or the areas which they have colonized. So the protagonists of history were kings, and the narration of the events revolved around them. So we see that the history was written from the point of view of the state, a sort of a state-centric history. Even if we look at the earlier period or early stages of Vedic age, there's a tendency where the historians tries to look at the history through the state point of view. So the protagonists of history were the kings, and the narrations were revolving around them always. The autocratic king, oppressive and unconcerned with the welfare of the subject, was standard image of the Indian ruler. That's why the British always termed Indian rulers as Oriental despots, with a few exceptions such as Ashoka, Chandragupta, or Akbar. As for the actual governing, the underlying assumption of the British administration was superior and centralized bureaucracy, the best form of administration. Hence, the decentralized quality of the Indian administration or the Aryan administration was relentlessly criticized. If we look history from the point of view of the British. In the late 19th century, Indian historian followed the model of political administrative history, producing dynastic history, highlighting the lives of rulers. But colonial explanation of India's past were not always acceptable to Indian historians. Historical theories were part of the growing political contestation. Particularly now, the close relationship between power and knowledge was being tactically organized. The evolution of Indian middle class families with the Indian language indicated more communication between the colonizer and the colonized. Most Indian historians of earlier 20th century were participant in the Indian motion, were participant in the Indian national movement for independence or influence of, you can say, or were deeply influenced. Their thinking was deeply influenced by this. Hence, were their history writing tools, or you can say historiography. Prominent among them and expressing varying degrees of national sentiments were R. Mitra, R. G. Bhandarkar, R. C. Dun, A. S. Atlekar, U. N. Ghoshal, K. P. Jaiswal, H. C. Rai Chaudhary, and R. K. Mukherjee, R. C. Majumdar, K. N. Nilkant Shastri, and H. C. Ojha. It is also interesting to see that majority of these historians, they were coming from the Bengali Bhadralok. So that was very close to the British in the uh, colonial days. So historical interpretation often drew from the existing new views about views, but could be changed to what was now regarded as legitimate nationalist interpretation. So, nationalist historians tended to endorse the more favorable view of colonial readings of the earlier past, but criticize the unfavorable. Thus, we see that whatever adjusted according to the ethos of our national movement was adjusted within the framework of our inclusive nationalism, and what was not fitting in the framework was completely rejected, or otherization of that thing happened. So it was asserted that in some institutions such as democracy and constitutional monarchy were familiar to the Indian past. References to the Mantri Parishad, the Council of Ministers, were compared to the working of the British Privy Council. So, non-violence was praised as special Indian contribution to civilization. Yet, at the same time, the Gupta king Samudragupta was described as the Napoleon of India, and his conquest was much lauded. Nationalism was taken back to the 4th century BC with the opposition to Alexander campaign and the creation of the Mauryan Empire that extended over virtually the entire subcontinent. Aryan Vedic culture was viewed as the formation of Indian civilization, its antiquity taken back to the second millennium BC. And very carefully, these British historians removed the Dravidian legacy of our Indian subcontinent. The emphasis was on the indigenous origins of many past achievements were gradually becoming visible, with an objection, not surprisingly, uh, to the theory of Oriental despotism, but an endorsement of ancient past being the golden age. Such an age being prerequisite for the claims to civilization. So this word civilization was a word which was supposed to be a very important part of history writing, and every nation at that time was writing history by closely associating itself with this word. The word civilization was even close to many patriarchal societies as well, because the patriarchs was supposed to be the most civilized as compared to the matriarchs. So now coming back to the view that was an inevitable adjunct to the nationalist aspiration in the earlier 20th century was that the past, the ancient past, was the golden age, and the British portrayed it with the history writing project that the past was the golden age, which was predominantly Vedic. The Golden Age was either entirely Hindu period that was seen unchanging, universally prosperous, or else reigns of Gupta king, with historians both Indian and the British had associated with past characteristic. Revival of Brahminical religion and culture. Cultural achievement was measured in terms of art, literature, and philosophy, with less attention to the description of social realities. It also put a premium on Sanskrit resources compared to that of Pali, Prakrit, or other languages. As Sanskrit was the language of the Vedas, hence it was put in such a way that it was to be the most pious and the most sacred language of the all. In fact, the Pali and Prakrit were so much overlooked that they, in contemporary time, we also look they are fighting for their existence. These languages, Pali and Prakrit, what were regarded as lesser language were assumed to have been used by people of lesser status. Sanskrit texts were given priority even where they were variants of some narratives of other language. Such variants, although known although known, were seldom analyzed in the historical comparative way. A case in point being different version of story of Rama. The Buddhists telling the story of Pali Jatakas or Prakrit versions of Jaina authors were discussed in the context of the study of Jatakas or of Jaina texts, but seldom in comparative way with similar works in Sanskrit, such as Ramayana of Valmiki. Linked to this was Vignore casting its shadow on the early writings of the ancient India. European historians worked in this period had been brought up on the classical tradition of Europe, believing that the greatest human achievement was civilization of the ancient Greek. Consequently, every newly discovered culture was measured against the norm of the ancient Greeks and invariably found to be lacking. So Greeks were civilization was supposed to be the benchmark for all the Abrahamic, I will say it, Abrahamic faiths, or those people who are writing the history of India belonging to Abrahamic faith. Sorry. So there were individual features worth admiring. The instinct was to try and connect them with the Greek culture. Vincent Smith, for some decades, regarded it as a preeminent history of India, was prone to this tendency, writing the murals at the famous Buddhist sites at Ajanta, and particularly of paintings supposed depicted the arrival of embassy from the Sasanian king of Persia, unaccounted with the Greeks, both artistically and historically. He states the picture, in addition to the interest as a contemporary record of political relations between India and Persia, is also is one of the most valuable value or landmark in the history of art. If not only fixes it or not only fixes the date of some of the most important paintings at Ajanta, and also establish standard by which the date of other can be judged, but also suggesting the possibility of Ajanta school of pictorial arts may have been derived from the Persian or ultimately the Greek. So, when we are studying the history from the point of view of the British and the Orientalists, the center of the civilization becomes Europe, and whatever the periphery and rest is becoming the periphery. But it was the other way around. India was the center of civilization. Our ancient past was glorious. We had a democratic and decentralized polity. But if we were to glance at Arthashastra, that is a later period than the Vedic age, the system was becoming highly centralized. But you can smell slight tinge of decentralization in this centralized polity as well. So, without wasting any further time, let us go and discuss what politics is. So politics is the way people living in in the country or are able to make decision on law, policy, or that they can for so that they can live harmoniously, where they opt a democratic federal communist dictatorship or republican approach. It is through politics that the society continues to operate. Key policies are implemented and global challenges are addressed. An empire or a country's political footprint is usually formed by a government, which is typically made up of one or more political parties, each usually having different views from the other. It is the role of the politician, the people who pursue working roles through these parties, to use their powers of persuasion and charisma to fight for the opportunity to secure a seat in the government, that is the epicenter of power, where they can follow through on the promises with their policies and can make changes for good of people living in their country or state. From managing the welfare of the countries for its services or empire for its services, such as running of hospitals, schools, building materials, housing, that will benefit the people that inhabit their country or empire. Politics plays a key role in the operation of daily lives of billions of people, indicating the clearly the welfare state model that was actually born and brought up in ancient India and was exported around the globe. In fact, the other way around, that is being exported from India, and later the British calling it that is was being exported from Europe. We often found to something as being political, all about politics, to mean it boils down to a power struggle between people or groups. The idea is that politics is a process of maneuvering to assert rival interests. Of course, the notion of competition over interest or power is very relevant to politics. with a capital P or a political party. Indeed, we might start by defining politics as as a process of comparative claims making by rival parties with the aim of mobilizing support to put these programs into action. But beyond this broad definition, it is useful to unpack what competition is about and the way in which it plays out. Means how two rival factions compete for power within the state structure. Both these questions will help us to further understand this topic in a better way. So, what is politics all about? Another question, very important, very interesting. One of the classical answer to this question is that politics is about who gets what, when, and how. What, when, and how. On this view, politics is essentially about setting contestation over distribution of material goods. This may have been a fair characterization of politics in the post World War II era, an era that saw the rolling out of progressive taxation and welfare provision by relative centralized state that was also prevalent during the ancient period if we look at the history of our past via British lenses, and political party system based on traditional left right ideological inclinations. Yet the notion that politics is solely or mainly about distribution has been challenged over the past. The increasingly silenced of the political ideological contestation around values and lifestyle suggests that politics is as much more arguably more about identity and culture as it is about material resources. Much of contemporary political debate revolves around that there are not neatly categorized rights according to left or right, such as environmental, gender, immigration, and security. So now we cruise on to what is Vedic. It is something that is related to Vedas. The Vedic religion, also called as Vedism, the religion of the ancient Indo-European speaking peoples who entered India around 1500 BCE from region of present-day Iran. It takes its name from the collection of the sacred texts known as the Vedas. So Vedism is the oldest stratum of religious activities in India for which there exists written material. It was one of the major traditions that shaped contemporary Hinduism as well. Knowledge of the Vedic religion is derived from the surviving text and also from certain rites that continues to be observed within the framework of Hinduism. The earliest Vedic religious beliefs included some held in common with the Indo-European speaking people, particularly with the earlier Iranians. Though it is impossible to say when Vedism eventually gave way to classical Hinduism, are decent are decreased in literary activity among the Vedic school from the 5th century BC onwards can be observed. And about that time, a more Hindu character being appeared. We see pictorial depictions of Ravana, the ten-headed demon king, in the Guler painting of Ramayana in the year 1720 from the Indo-European sources. So now coming to the question, what are Vedic texts which shapes the political structure of the Vedic age? The only extant Vedic materials are are the only authentic source of the of Vedic age is the Vedas, which are compared and handed down orally over about the period of 10 centuries, from about 15 to 5th century BCE. The Vedic corpus is composed in an archaic Sanskrit. The most important texts are also the oldest one. They are four collections, that is Samhitas, that are called as Veda or Vedas. The Rig Veda or the Veda of verses, the earliest of those is composed about 1000 hymns addressed to various deities, mostly arranged to serve the needs of the priestly families who were the custodian of the sacred literature. The Yajurveda or the Veda of the sacrificial formulas contain prose formulas applicable to various rites along the verses intended for similar purpose. The Samaveda or the Veda of chant is made up of selection of verses drawn mostly wholly from Rig Veda that are provided with musical notion and are intended to aid the performance of sacred songs. Finally, the Atharva Veda is later compilation that includes incantation of enchantation and of magic spells. Excuse me. To each Veda is attached the body of prose of later date called Brahmanas, 800 BC to 600 BC, its date is, which explain the ceremonial application of texts and the origin and importance of sacrificial rites of which the Vedas are composed. Further, the appendices are of the Vedas are Aranyakas around 600 BC, the Upanishads 700 BC to 500 BC, respectively, expound the symbolism of the more difficult rites and speculate on the nature of universe and humanity's relation to it. What is a political structure? Another question that ringing our minds. Political structure is a term frequently used in political science. The term political structure used is in a general sense refers to institutions or that groups and their relations to each other, their patterns of interaction within political system and political regulation, laws and norms present in political system in such a way that they constitute the political landscape of the political entity. In the social domain, its counterpart is social structure. So now we have understood these variables, so now we can easily understand what was the political structure of Vedic age. So let's begin with it. The tribal polity of the Vedic age was not completely egalitarian. A division is found in Rig Veda itself, which is seen in references to two groups, the Rajanyas, or those who fought the wars and were credited to be the senior lineage, and the rest of clansmen or the Vis, who form the junior lineage. Though none of the group occupied a distinct social hierarchy, constant conflicts and inter-tribal wars helped to create a division in the society. The growing needs of more pastoral lands, cattle, for the protection of people and their settlements all probably contributed to an increase in inter and intra-tribal conflicts and warfare. The clans held large yajnas or sacrifices to help the warriors groups in the wars. In these yajnas, the officiating priest or the purohita acted as the mediator between the clansmen and the god. He invoked the god's blessings of the tribal chiefs for his success in the wars. Initially, the whole clan participated in these yajnas on an equal footing. Large scale distribution of wealth, food, etc., were made during the sacrifices, and members got an equal share. But the growing incidence of conflicts and fights, yajnas or sacrifices also became important, and the Purohita assumed special status in the society. So the clergy, that is the Purohita, was now closely associated with state. Previously, there was a demarcation between the powers of clergy and the power of state, because our state was like that it was influenced by decentralized polity, means religion was not allowed to interfere in day-to-day affair of the state, which Europe learned in the later phases with the signing of Treaty of Westphalia, where the authority of church was removed from the day-to-day affair of states. In the later period of in the later part of the period of this period, they receive a major share of gift from the rajas and assume superior position vis-a-vis the other clan members. The office of the rajas also assumed important or on account of wars, etc., and the division between the senior and the junior lineages became sharper. At what point of time these political distinctions became apparent is difficult to state, but we must remember that the 10th book of the Rig Veda contains Purush Sukta hymn, and in the later Vedic texts we find evidence of superior Rajanya groups assuming the status of Kshatriya, a separate Varna by itself, or the Varna that was dedicated for the purpose of fighting, sort of a martial clans. These development took place around 1000 BCE. It does not mean that the society was stagnant during our period of this study. In fact, it was changing slowly but surely, leading to the development in the later Vedic phase of the complex socio-political structure. The tribal assemblies, example, Gana, Vidahata, Sabha, Samiti, are mentioned in the Rig Veda. The Sabha may have been council of sect clan members, and the Samiti perhaps comprise the whole clan. These assemblies perform the functions of the government and administration and were also involved in the section of Rajas from amongst the clansmen. They thus kept the power of the warriors in check, a sort of a check and balance system. However, as stated before, though we do not find well defined political hierarchy in the earlier Vedic setup, the changes during the period gave rise to socio political hierarchy, which manifested itself in the origin of Varna system during the later Vedic phase. Early Vedic society was governed by tribal values and norms that were largely egalitarian. So, now coming to the point what the Vedic political structure is all about. So, excuse me, Jana was used as a sense of people or the tribe in the Rig Vedic period. But the concept of Janpada emerged later. Janpada means the area where the tribal settled. The word Rashtra was also used for the first time in the later Vedic text. Rashtra, that is now used as synonymous to nationalism or nation, sorry. However, it was still not used in the sense of a state with well defined territories. The Kurus who performed the Kurus who performed and formed the union between two major Vedic tribes, Bharatas and the Puranas, are mentioned in the text as occupying the areas in the upper portion of the Ganga Yamuna Doab. Similarly, the Panchalas are mentioned as people who occupied the middle portion of the Doab, called the Panchal Desa. This indicates the tribal identities that were merged with territorial identities. It is also stated that when the Kurus and the Panchalas came together, their authority over upper and the middle reaches of Ganga and Yamuna Doabs was complete. These changes in the relationship between the Jana and the area over which it wielded control helped towards the formation of Mahajanpada and Janpada by the 6th century BCE. So the tribal chief and the warriors. Who were the tribal chiefs and what were craftsmanship or what the marshalship they showed that they were termed as or they were elected as tribal chiefs. When the tribal group came to be associated and identified with particular territories, it also brought about a change in the status and function of the tribal chief. The Rajan or the chief was no longer involved only in the cattle raids but emerged as the protector of the territories where the tribesmen settled. The Rajanya, which already was a superior lineage during the Rig Vedic period, now became Kshatriya, that is, those who held power over dominions, which is the literal meaning of the word Kshatriya. The Kshatriya class based their power on the role as the protector of the tribes and the land over which these tribes settle. The Vis had to pay presentations to Kshatriya in lieu of letters protections. Thus, the status of Vis was progressively subordinate to Kshatriya lineage. Bali and the Bhaga was no longer meant present, was meant presentations given at will, but gradually assumed the form of regular tributes and taxes. So now coming to the tribal assembly, the changes in the status of Kshatriya or the warrior class is also reflected in the changing nature of tribal assemblies. The Sabha became more important than Samiti during this period. References to Rajas is the assembly in the Sabha suggest that they helped the king in his duties. The office of the Raja or the chief was not based solely on birth, but the choice of Rajas was restricted to the Kshatriya. So now we will know what was Raja's legitimacy. In the absence of firmly established principles of hereditary primogeniture, consectory rituals became very important for the ruler in order to assert his authority. Hence, ceremonial sacrifices like Rajsuya, Ashwamedha, Vajpaya were performed on a lavish scale. In the Rig Vedic period, Ashwamedha Yajna was a small affair, but later period this was performed to subjugate other areas and legitimize the rule of the holder on alien land. The other two yajnas included prayers for the ruler, health, and all three were in essence legitimizing methods employed by the Raja to proclaim his superiority and power. These sacrifices were found to be relevant in the later period, also when the new kingdoms and new monarch emerged. These used sacrifices to give religious legitimacy to their power. The Raja was also required to integrate his territory with resources, economic production, distribution, which enhanced the status considerably from a mere raider or a leader in battles. Hence, he was not yet the sovereign. The fact that he was elected and could be removed put severe constraints on him since he was answerable to the clan. Also, he did not appoint the other Rajas who helped him with his duties. They were chiefs in their own right. What is important is that the Kshatriya lineage gained a distinct superior status during the period of during this period. The reason being the concept of territorial identity was established now. Thus, territory became physical manifestation of the ruler's power to rule. Excuse me. So now we will investigate much deeper and will try to understand what was the dynamics of tribal conflict. The nature of intra-tribal conflicts and the conflicts within tribes also changed. Their dynamics altered considerably. Fights were no longer skirmishes over cattle. Now the acquisition of land was an important element in this dispute. And it is in this period that lands become an extensively used resource along with water. The necessity of increasing territory can be connected with the growth of population within the tribes. Iron weapons and light wheeled chariots driven by horses raised the efficiency of fighters. The Mahabharata depicts intra-clan warfare, between the Kauravas and the Pandavas of the Kuru clan. So all the day-to-day affairs, including the conflicts, There were intertribal conflicts. The role of Purohita or the priest was becoming increasingly important. Within the rising prominence of Rajanya, the Brahmanas too became important since they legitimized the office of the ruler through consecratory rituals. The redistribution of wealth through dana that is donation, and dakshina again donation that is given to religious people on such occasion was primarily from the Kshatriya Yajmana to the Brahmin priest. The elaborate consecratory rituals suggested that initially the power of Rajas was not so secure, and hence he had to provide proof of his ability to rule. The status of officiating priests became at par with gods in the later period. It was felt that gods had to be prohibited with yajnas, and officiating brahmanas has to be satisfied with dana, that is donation. Thus, the channel of redistribution was between these two higher status group, and political supremacy was slowly becoming the domain of the Kshatriya. So, as we have already read about the declining status of Vis and the ascendancy of the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins, so the society was composed of unequal groups. One hymn that describes the origin of the Varnas, that is Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and the Shudras, from the body of the universe of Prajapati, that is the universal creator. The hymn of the primal man becomes or comes from the later portion of Rig Veda. This hymn, for the first time, describes the origins of four Varnas. It says as the following: when they divided the man into how many parts they can divide him, what was the mouth, what was his arms, what was his thighs, and what is his feet called. The Brahman was his mouth, of his arm made the Kshatriyas, his thighs became Vaishyas, of the feet was the Shudras born. The symbolism which is projected in these hymns is that Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are the limbs of the society. However, these limbs did not have equal status. The Brahmanas were compared to the head, where the Shudras was compared to the feet. In social life, Brahmanas were considered the highest Varna because society could communicate with gods with the help of Brahmanas only. The Shudras, on the other hand, performed menial tasks, including slaves captured in war. So now coming to the concept of Varna or the caste, the system of Varna had the following features: status by birth, hierarchical ordering of Varnas as Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, with Brahmanas at the top and the Shudras at the base. Rule of endogamy and ritual purity. The Varna system is further tied with the concept of dharma, that is universal law. And the Varna was an attempt to establish a social law of systematic functioning of the society. However, Varna Dharma system was not properly developed during the later Vedic period. The division of the social group was based on occupation alone. and the society was still flexible, and these castes were still fluid. When one's occupation did not depend on birth. Even in the later time, that is post Vedic, the Varna Dharma described the ritual status of each group. The Varna system did not prevent the non Kshatriya from claiming Kshatriya status and becoming rulers. Example being the Nandas and the Mauryas in the later period as compared to the Vedic periods. Nor the Brahmanas from claiming the political sovereignty. Example Sunga kings. Thus, the theoretical model of Varna system could never be rigidly enforced in the post-Vedic period. It is likely that during the later Vedic period, with the shift in the geographic focus, the Vedic people encountered many non-Vedic tribes considerably. Interaction must have helped in formation of composite society. At least the Atharva Veda depicts a host of non-Vedic religion practices which were sanctioned by the priest. However, the tribal endogamy through strict marriage rules was the aim of, or you can say was the aim in order to maintain the purity of the tribe. Also, the growing importance of Kshatriyas and Brahmanas in society made it imperative to maintain their exclusive superior status as compared to the rest. During the later Vedic period, the concept of Varna was rudimentary in nature. The notion of untouchability, for instance, was absent. So, now coming to the Gotra. The institution of Gotra, literally meaning cow pen, appeared during this period. As against the tribal endogamy, marriage within the tribe, that is, people practice Gotra, exogamy, marriage outside the Gotra. Gotra signified descent form a common ancestor, and marriage could not take place between couples belonging to the same Gotra. The other most sacred system of Indian culture, that is family. The patriarchal family was well established and the Grahapati acquired a special status. Since householding economy was gaining prominence, the position of the householder to acquire economic importance. The rights to land were based on usage and communal ownership of land prevailed. The Grahapati were wealthy and their ritual role Vastha and Yajmana, that is, those who order sacrifices, were highly respected. Their wealth did not come from gifts but also was produced by their own efforts. Through yajna, they were bound to perform or gain merit. A part of their wealth got channeled to the Brahmanas. Despite the presence of some women philosophers and with the reference to few queens participating in coronation ritual, were considered subordinates to men and were not involved in any major decision making. Now, the life of an individual, the much micro level analysis, was divided into three ashramas. That is, stages of life were prescribed in these stages, represented by brahmachari, that is studentship, grahastha, householdership, vanapasra, partial retirement from household life by giving living in the forest. It seems that the fourth was the sannyasa or the complete retirement from the active participation in the world. stages of life was not known till the time that the Upanishads were written. Sannyasis or the ascetic in the later periods were individuals who protested either passively or actively against the Vedic structure. So, in the end, I will just say that the society of the Vedic age was deeply influenced with the politics that was taking place. And the politics was influenced with the economics or the resource sharing of the Vedic age. The resource sharing was an important part of the ancient period as land was considered as a resource. Increasing importance of the land was understood as the human beings understood that the cattle required to graze on lands and drink water, and the food production can only happen on the lands by tilling the lands as well as by irrigation through rivers. So this important factor made land a very important resource, and then it influenced the politics, and politics influenced the social structure. So the social structure was of any family was organized in such a way that it is very similar, or you can say it as a that the family was militarily organized. And I will conclude by saying that the political structure of Vedic age was deeply influenced by Aryan culture. The Rajan or the king was the first among equals, as in every tribal kingship. The king was under the check by his fellow tribesmen. The nature of the kingship was tribal in nature. The political system, which is inclusive of identity formation, and the nature of nationalism, which is wonderfully inclusive and calls for a hybrid identity, which is inclusive incarnation of our Indian nationalism, was a key factor in bringing these facts of history into in front of your eyes. Hence, I will term that the political structure of the Vedic age was quasi centralized and quasi decentralized. Why I'm saying it quasi centralized and quasi decentralized? Because somewhere where the historians have tried to study the history from above, that is, viewing it from the state centric approach, from the eyes of the kings, the history seems to be as if it is all about the day to day affair of the kings, and the common masses didn't find any place in the history. Same goes for the subaltern history, as subaltern history much put discounted much of these colonial historians, and put history writing in such a way that even the folklores were considered to be history at that time. Those history that was not documented was also a history. Folklore was also considered as history. So when the Rig Vedas were being written, the period before the Rig Vedas were composed of, the subaltern historian finds their upper hand in it. The reason being because subaltern historians believe that history should be written from the point of view of common masses. Even the Marxist historian also believe the same thing. But Marxist historian have a habit of taking a state-centric approach. And a state always had a colonial DNA in it. Because state put a check over you and over your activities. It limits you to a certain areas. Hence, state is a structure that is heavily criticized by the Marxists. And even the Marxist scholars say that it should wither away someday. But unfortunately, we find many Marxist scholars taking advantage of the state of which museum are a part of, or you can say in what we say in Hindi, Abhilekhagar are a part of, in writing the history from the Marxist point of view. So the colonial historian have a habit of putting their civilization on the topmost and putting the Greek civilization or Macedonic civilization as the benchmark for writing history and viewing other civilization as a civilization that are inferior or to be looked down upon. So a racist mindset historian can't write history in such a way that it is appealing to the Occidents. In other words, Orientalists have written history in such a way, or the colonial historians have written history in such a way that it suits the agenda of Weizmann Burden theory. So, with this, I will conclude my lecture and I will throw open the floor for uh, question and answer. And over to you, Chair, with the permission of the Chair. Over to you, Dr. Sadra. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Hello. Thank you. Thank you to the chair. Thank you, everyone. Please, now the floor is open for question, criticism, comments, and suggestion. So you may ask now by posting your question in the comment box. Thank you.